Sophia had everything most children could only dream about. She was the only daughter of a man whose name was spoken with both respect and envy in the world of business. Her father, Mr. Jonathan Hale, was a self-made millionaire, a man who had built his empire with sharp decisions and an iron will. The Hale family lived in a mansion that stood like a palace at the edge of the city, surrounded by tall gates, perfectly trimmed gardens, and fountains that sparkled under the sun. People passing by often slowed down to stare, whispering about the fortune and power that existed within those walls. To the outside world, Sophia's life seemed perfect. She had tutors who taught her languages, private chefs who cooked her favorite meals, and closets full of dresses from famous designers. Her room looked like something from a fairy tale, with a chandelier glittering above her bed and shelves stacked with toys, books, and treasures from every country her father had visited. When her father hosted parties, guests would look at Sophia and smile kindly, sometimes even saying how lucky she was to be born into such comfort and wealth. They could not see what she carried inside. Behind the beauty of the mansion and the richness of her lifestyle was a truth that made Sophia's world very different from the smiling photographs in magazines. When she was just 6 years old, she had suffered an accident that left her unable to walk. Since that day, she had lived in a wheelchair, watching life from a seat that she could never rise from. Her legs no longer carried her the way they once had, and though her father had spared no expense in searching for answers, doctors around the world told him the same thing: her condition was beyond repair. At first, Sophia could not understand why she could no longer run through the gardens or climb the marble stairs like other children. She would cry and ask her father why her legs would not move. Jonathan Hale, who had never been defeated in his career, was crushed each time his daughter's eyes filled with tears. He brought in specialists from London, Paris, New York, and Tokyo. They stayed in his home, examined Sophia with their finest equipment, and gave long reports filled with complicated words. In the end, they all said nearly the same: there was little hope. Years passed, and Sophia's life became a mix of privilege and limitation. She grew up surrounded by gifts, but none of them could replace what she missed the most: the feeling of running free under the open sky. From the window of her room, she often watched the garden where gardeners trimmed roses and children of guests chased each other across the grass. She smiled at them, but her heart ached quietly. Sometimes she dreamed of herself running, her hair flying behind her, her feet hitting the ground with strength. She would wake from such dreams with tears rolling down her cheeks, knowing it was only a picture in her mind. Her father tried to give her everything to keep her happy. He built her a special garden path wide enough for her wheelchair, so she could go outside and enjoy the flowers. He arranged for her to have piano lessons, painting lessons, and even horse riding lessons adapted to her needs. People admired him for his devotion, but in his heart he knew he could not give her the one thing she wanted most. The man who could solve business crises with a single phone call could not solve his daughter's suffering. This truth humbled him in ways money never could. Sophia herself was not bitter, though the pain was real. She had a kind heart, and she learned to hide her sadness so that her father would not worry. When visitors came, she greeted them with polite smiles. When her tutors encouraged her, she applied herself to learning. Inside, however, she often felt alone. There were nights when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why life had chosen her for this challenge. She was too young to understand fate or destiny, but old enough to feel the weight of longing. Her father's mansion became both a blessing and a cage. The wide halls, the grand staircases, the endless rooms each reminded her of the freedom she did not have. The marble floor was beautiful, but it was also hard and cold under the wheels of her chair. The gardens bloomed in colors, but she could only roll slowly between the flowers, never kneel to touch the soil or run barefoot through the grass. Luxury gave her comfort, yet it could not cure the emptiness that followed her like a shadow. Every new doctor who arrived at the Hale mansion brought with him a wave of hope. Sophia would watch them unpack their instruments, speak with confidence, and assure her father that something might be possible. For a few days, her heart would rise with belief. She would submit to their tests, exercises, and treatments, no matter how tiring. But when the days ended in disappointment, the sadness returned stronger than before. She began to fear hope itself, because hope always seemed to end in silence. Sophia's mother had passed away when she was very young, leaving her father as her only true companion. Jonathan Hale loved his daughter deeply, but he often drowned himself in work to escape his feelings of helplessness. He told himself that he was fighting for her future by growing his empire, but in quiet moments, he admitted that money was powerless against her condition. There were times when Sophia caught him standing in her doorway at night, watching her sleep with tears in his eyes. She pretended not to notice, because she knew he did not want her to see his weakness. As Sophia entered her teenage years, she became more graceful in her acceptance. She dressed elegantly, read widely, and spoke with a maturity beyond her age. People admired her spirit, saying she was a young woman of great strength. But only Sophia knew how many hours she spent staring at her own legs, willing them to move, praying silently for a miracle. She never stopped longing for the simple act of walking. Not to run marathons, not to climb mountains, just to take a few steps on her own. Sometimes, when the household was quiet, she would ask the staff to wheel her into the old music room. There, she would play the piano softly, losing herself in melodies that spoke what words could not. Music became her secret voice, a way to pour out the emotions she kept hidden during the day. Each note carried both her sorrow and her hope. When she finished playing, she often sat in silence, imagining applause from a life where she could walk on stage. Sophia's life was like a picture framed in gold. To the world, it was beautiful and enviable. To her, it was incomplete. She had wealth, comfort, and education, but she longed for freedom more than for jewels or gowns. Her story, though surrounded by grandeur, was one of quiet struggle. Each day began with a smile for her father and ended with a silent prayer in the dark. She did not know then that her path would soon cross with someone very different from her world, someone who would bring change not through riches or science, but through simplicity and faith. As the years slipped quietly by, Sophia's struggle deepened in ways that even her father could not see. On the surface, she was a picture of grace and patience. She carried herself with calmness, smiling when guests came, listening politely to every doctor, and never raising her voice in frustration. But inside, her heart was restless. Every morning, when sunlight filtered into her room, she woke with the same thought: perhaps today something would change. And every night, she went to sleep with the heavy knowledge that nothing had. Sophia's days were carefully planned by tutors, nurses, and attendants who were instructed to give her the best of everything. She studied music, literature, science, and even foreign languages. She painted pictures of gardens and oceans she had never touched with her own feet. She played soft songs on the piano, filling the house with gentle notes. But beneath all these activities was a quiet emptiness. What use were lessons about the world, she wondered, if she could not step out into it freely? What joy was there in reading about mountains and rivers when she could not walk beyond her father's gates without help? Sometimes, when her father returned late at night from his business meetings, he would sit beside her bed and talk about his day. He told her about contracts, deals, and big decisions. He spoke of numbers that impressed everyone in the outside world. Sophia listened with affection, but she often thought to herself that the biggest decision her father could not make was the one that mattered most: how to give her back her freedom. He had all the wealth in the world, yet he could not buy her a simple step. Her father tried endlessly. Every few months, new doctors were invited. They arrived with suitcases of instruments, scanning machines, and modern therapies. Each one gave promises that stirred hope in her heart. She would sit patiently as they examined her legs, tested her reflexes, and prescribed exercises. For a short while, she would feel a spark of belief: maybe this doctor was different, Maybe this time would be the miracle she had prayed for. But in the end, they all gave the same answer: there was little more to be done. The disappointment left scars on her spirit, scars invisible but deep. Sophia began to learn a painful lesson: hope was dangerous. Every time she believed too much, the fall was harder. So she started hiding her feelings, showing less excitement when new doctors arrived. She told herself she would not expect anything, yet her heart always betrayed her. Deep inside, she wanted to believe. Deep inside, she never stopped wishing. As she grew into her teenage years, her loneliness became sharper. She had no brothers or sisters to share her thoughts with, no close friends who understood her world. Other children lived different lives, running, climbing, dancing, and laughing. She was often invited to gatherings, but she disliked the attention. Wherever she went, people's eyes followed her chair. Some looked at her with sympathy, some with curiosity, and some with pity. She hated the pity most of all. She wanted to be seen not as a girl in a chair, but simply as Sophia. In the evenings, when the mansion grew quiet, she would roll herself to the balcony outside her room. From there she could see the city lights in the distance, glowing like stars on the ground. She imagined herself walking among those lights, free to choose any direction. She dreamed of simple things others took for granted: standing in a crowd, walking across a park, even climbing a small hill. She told herself that one day, somehow, she would know that feeling again. She didn't know how or when, but she refused to give up that dream. Her father, meanwhile, was growing weary in his own way. Though he never admitted it aloud, he had begun to lose faith in the power of medicine. He had seen too many specialists, heard too many polished speeches, and spent fortunes that brought no result. His heart ached every time he saw Sophia put on a brave smile, pretending she was fine. He knew she was not fine. He knew she longed for something he could not give. In the world of business, he was a lion. But in the quiet of his home, watching his daughter struggle, he felt smaller than ever before. Sophia's struggle was not only physical, it was emotional too. She wrestled with questions she could not answer. Why had this happened to her? Why did children with less wealth live freely while she, with all the world's luxuries, was trapped? At times, she wondered if life was unfair, but she quickly silenced those thoughts. She reminded herself to be grateful for what she had. After all, she had a loving father, a safe home, and more comfort than many others. Still, gratitude could not erase the longing in her soul. The turning point of her struggle was not a single moment but a slow realization. She began to understand that even though she could not walk, she had to live. She could not let her life be nothing but waiting for a miracle. She started focusing more on her studies, reading books about people who had overcome great hardships. She admired stories of courage and resilience. These books whispered to her that strength was not always about legs or arms, it was about the heart. Yet even as she grew stronger inside, the emptiness remained. She knew her father would never stop searching for a cure. She also knew that every failure chipped away at his spirit. Sometimes, late at night, she heard him in his study, pacing back and forth. The sound of his footsteps reminded her of what she could not do. It made her heart heavy, but it also gave her determination. She wanted to be strong, not just for herself, but for him. The Hale mansion, filled with beauty and grandeur, became a strange kind of stage for Sophia's hidden battle. The world outside saw a graceful young woman, polite and educated. Inside, she was a fighter, wrestling with invisible chains every single day. Her early struggle was not just about her legs, it was about holding on to hope without letting it destroy her, about smiling through pain, about learning patience in a life that felt unfair. Her journey in those years was like a storm hidden under calm skies. No one looking at her could guess the depth of her feelings. She carried her sadness quietly, like a secret folded in her heart. She laughed when others laughed, smiled when others expected it, but in her private moments she allowed the tears to flow. It was this mix of courage and hidden sorrow that shaped her into the person she was becoming. Sophia did not know it then, but all the years of struggle were preparing her for something unexpected. Her patience, her quiet strength, her longing, they were not wasted. They were shaping her character, teaching her to recognize true kindness when it came, and preparing her to trust someone who would one day say the words that would change her life, "Let me try." The summer sun was warm and golden the year everything began to change for Sophia. Her father, believing a change of scenery might lift her spirits, decided to host a large charity event at their countryside estate. The mansion's wide lawns were decorated with white tents, strings of lights, and tables filled with food and flowers. Guests arrived in shining cars, dressed in fine clothes, speaking of business, art, and generosity. To most people, it was just another elegant evening in the life of the Hale family. To Sophia, it was another event where she would smile politely while secretly wishing she could join the children running freely across the grass. She sat near the edge of the garden in her wheelchair, shaded by a tree, her eyes following the laughter of little ones playing tag. Their feet moved so quickly, their faces so bright with joy, and Sophia's heart ached with quiet longing. She tried not to show it, but inside she whispered the same prayer she had whispered countless times before, "If only I could stand, if only I could walk again." She thought no one could hear that silent cry. But someone did. Among the many workers hired to serve food, carry baskets, and arrange decorations was a young farmer named Arun. He was not from the world of wealth or privilege. He came from a small village a few miles away, where he lived a simple life tending to his family's fields. He was known in his village for his kindness and for the traditional remedies passed down through generations. His hands were rough from farm work, his clothes plain, but his eyes carried a calmness that drew people in. He had been asked to help deliver fresh fruits from his farm to the event, and though he felt out of place among the fine guests, he did his work with quiet dedication. As Arun carried a basket of apples across the lawn, his eyes happened to fall on Sophia. He did not see her the way others often did, with pity or curiosity. He saw the longing in her gaze, the way she looked at the children, the silent storm hidden behind her graceful smile. Something stirred in his heart. Instead of turning away, he walked toward her with gentle steps. Sophia noticed him approaching. She was used to people looking at her chair before looking at her face, but this young man's eyes met hers directly, as though the chair did not exist. He placed the basket of fruit on a nearby table and then, in a quiet voice, asked, "Do you wish to walk again?" Sophia blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked her so directly. Usually, people offered sympathy or encouragement, but never such a simple, daring question. For a moment, she did not know whether to laugh or cry. Finally, with a small, almost bitter smile, she said, "Of course I wish that. But wishing does not make it real." Arun did not flinch at her words. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice steady, almost like a whisper of the wind. "Let me try," he said. The words were so unexpected, so gentle, that they lingered in the air between them. Sophia looked at him in disbelief. Who was this young man in plain clothes, speaking as if he could do what the finest doctors in the world could not? Her first instinct was to dismiss him, to think he was foolish or perhaps mocking her. But something in his eyes stopped her. They were calm, honest, filled with a quiet certainty she had not seen before. He did not look at her with pity. He looked at her with belief. Before she could respond, her father's voice called her name from across the garden. Jonathan Hale was busy entertaining important guests, but he never failed to keep an eye on his daughter. Sophia quickly turned her chair, not wanting her father to notice the stranger beside her. She did not mention the conversation that evening, but the words "let me try" replayed in her mind again and again, like a melody she could not forget. The next day, Sophia asked one of the house staff about the young man. She learned that his name was Arun, that he came from a poor farming family, and that he had stayed behind to help clean up after the event. Something inside her stirred with curiosity. She wanted to see him again, though she could not explain why. Perhaps it was the way he had spoken with such quiet confidence, or perhaps it was the way he had looked at her not as a fragile girl in a chair, but as someone who could still hope. Later that afternoon, when she spotted him carrying boxes near the back of the garden, she asked her attendant to wheel her closer. Arun greeted her with the same calmness as before, as though it were the most natural thing to see her again. Sophia hesitated before speaking. "You said something yesterday," she began softly. "Do you really believe you can help me?" Arun nodded slowly. "I cannot promise," he said, "but I can try. Where I come from, we use methods that are not found in books. They are old ways, simple ways. They require patience, trust, and time. If you are willing, I will do my best." Sophia felt torn. She remembered the countless doctors, the endless tests, the heavy disappointments. Part of her wanted to laugh at the idea that a farmer with rough hands and no degrees could succeed where the greatest experts had failed. But another part of her, small yet powerful, whispered that maybe this was different. Maybe hope sometimes came from places one least expected. That night, Sophia could not sleep. She lay awake in her grand bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Arun's words. "Let me try." They were simple, yet they carried more comfort than the polished speeches of famous doctors. She thought of his steady eyes, his calm tone, his gentle presence. Something about him felt true. Still, she worried. What would her father say if he knew? Jonathan Hale was a man of science and logic. He trusted certificates, hospitals, and laboratories, not village remedies or unknown methods. If she told him about Arun, he would surely forbid it. And yet, Sophia's heart longed for even the smallest chance. The next morning, when she saw Arun in the garden again, she whispered to him, "If we do this, no one must know, not yet. My father will never allow it." Arun agreed quietly. He understood her fear. He was not here for money or recognition. He simply wanted to help. And so, in secret, a fragile trust began between them. It was the first spark of something Sophia had not felt in years: real hope. A hope not born from wealth or medicine, but from faith in a stranger who had nothing to offer but his hands, his heart, and his words, "Let me try." The secret meetings between Sophia and Arun began quietly, almost like a whisper of hope hidden in the corners of the Grand Hale estate. Every morning, after breakfast, Sophia's father would leave for meetings or spend hours locked in his study. That was when she would ask her attendant to take her out into the garden, near the shaded side where few people ever went. Arun would already be waiting there, carrying a small bag with bottles of oil, cloths, and herbs he had carefully prepared. Their sessions were unlike anything Sophia had ever known. The doctors of her past had used machines, sharp instruments, and heavy exercises. Their methods felt cold and clinical, as though she were only a case in a book. But Arun's way was different. His touch was gentle, his voice calm, and his methods simple yet full of care. He would massage her legs with herbal oils, pressing on places that seemed forgotten by the world. He spoke little while working, but when he did, his words carried quiet encouragement. "Do not think of what you cannot do," he would say softly. "Think only of what is possible today. Even a small movement is a beginning." At first, Sophia felt nothing but pain and exhaustion. Her legs had been still for so long that even the lightest pressure made them ache. Sometimes she wanted to tell him to stop, to say it was useless. But when she looked at his steady face, she found the courage to continue. There was no impatience in his eyes, no sign of giving up. For the first time, she felt that someone truly believed in her, not as a patient, but as a person who could heal. Days turned into weeks, and the sessions continued in secret. Each morning, Arun worked patiently, massaging, stretching, and teaching Sophia how to breathe deeply with every movement. He showed her how to imagine energy flowing through her body, how to close her eyes and picture herself standing. It felt strange at first, almost childish, but she tried. And little by little, something inside her began to change. One evening, after a particularly long session, Sophia noticed something she had not felt in years: a faint tingling in her toes. It was so slight that she thought she had imagined it. But when she told Arun, his face lit up with quiet joy. "That is not imagination," he said firmly. "That is life returning. Do not doubt it." Sophia's heart raced. For years she had lived without a single sign of change. And now, for the first time, her body was whispering back to her. She went to bed that night with tears in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of fragile hope. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual, eager for the session. As Arun worked on her legs, the tingling returned, stronger this time. It was painful yet beautiful, like sunlight breaking through a heavy cloud. She clenched her fists, holding back cries, but Arun encouraged her. "Pain is not always your enemy," he said gently. "Sometimes it is the sign that your body is remembering." Sophia did not tell her father. She could not bear to raise his hopes only to see them crushed again. She wanted to be certain before she shared anything. So she kept the secret close to her heart, carrying it like a treasure. To everyone else, she was the same graceful young woman in a wheelchair. But inside, she felt like a seed beginning to sprout after years of waiting in the dark. Weeks stretched into months, and her strength grew slowly. She could now move her toes slightly, then her ankles. Each new movement felt like a miracle, and she would close her eyes in gratitude. Arun never allowed her to rush. Step by step, he reminded her. The tree does not grow in a single day. It rises slowly, and that is why its roots are strong. There were setbacks too. Some days her legs felt heavy and unresponsive, and frustration would rise like a storm within her. On those days, Sophia would grow silent, afraid the hope was slipping away. But Arun always noticed. He would place his hand gently over hers and say, "Do not fear the silence of a day. Healing is like the tide. Sometimes it pulls back, but it always returns." His words carried a peace that gave her strength to continue. One crisp autumn morning, the turning point arrived. The sun was rising over the fields, painting the garden in soft gold. Sophia sat in her chair, breathing deeply as Arun guided her through another session. He helped her stand beside the chair, holding her firmly under the arms. She had tried standing before, but her legs had always felt like stone, refusing to support her. This time, something was different. The tingling in her legs grew stronger, her knees trembled, and for a moment she felt weight pressing down through her feet. Her breath caught in her throat. Her body shook, and tears filled her eyes. "I can feel it," she whispered. Arun's grip tightened, steadying her, but he did not lift her. He allowed her to bear the weight herself, even if only for seconds. And in those seconds, Sophia stood not fully, not strongly, but enough to know that her body was awakening. When she sat back down, she wept openly. Arun knelt beside her, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "One day, you will take a step." That evening, Sophia could not hide her joy. Her father noticed her glowing face at dinner and asked what had made her so happy. She smiled and simply said, "It was a good day." She wanted desperately to tell him the truth, but fear still held her back. What if it was temporary? What if hope betrayed her again? She decided to wait, to keep her secret safe until the day she could show him with her own steps. The secret sessions continued, each one bringing new progress. Sophia learned to shift her weight, to balance for longer moments, and to move her legs with more control. The pain was real, but so was the joy. She laughed more, sang softly during the exercises, and even began to paint pictures of herself standing in gardens and walking among flowers. Arun would smile at those paintings and say, "You are drawing tomorrow." With every passing week, Sophia's bond with Arun grew deeper. He never treated her as fragile or broken. To him, she was simply someone with strength waiting to be discovered. His faith in her was steady, unshaken by setbacks, and it became the anchor she leaned on. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as the daughter of a wealthy man, not as a patient in a chair, but as Sophia, a girl with dreams worth believing in. The day was coming when the world would see what had begun in secret. The day when her father, who had tried everything money could buy, would witness something no amount of wealth had ever achieved. Sophia did not know exactly when that day would be, but she could feel it in her heart. Each step of progress, each small movement, was leading her closer. She was no longer only wishing. She was becoming. The morning of change came quietly, without any sign that it would be different from the others. The sky was painted in soft shades of blue, and the air was cool with the promise of winter. Sophia woke earlier than usual, her heart racing with an energy she could not explain. Something inside told her that this day was not like the rest. She asked to be taken to the garden, where Arun was already waiting, as if he too felt the weight of the moment. Her father was busy inside the mansion, meeting a group of business partners who had flown in from another city. That gave Sophia the time she needed. Arun greeted her with his calm smile and began their session as he always did: slow stretches, careful massages, gentle words of encouragement. But Sophia felt stronger today. Her body responded faster, her legs tingled with more life, and her determination burned brighter than ever before. When Arun helped her rise from her chair, she held onto him firmly, her heart pounding. For weeks she had been able to stand for moments at a time, balancing with trembling knees. But today, as she gripped his arms, she felt steadier. She took a deep breath, and instead of letting him carry all her weight, she pressed her feet against the ground with more strength than she ever had before. Arun noticed immediately. His eyes shone with quiet excitement. "Today is the day," he whispered. "Do not fear it." Sophia closed her eyes, holding back tears. She leaned forward, lifted one foot carefully, and moved it just a little ahead of the other. Her whole body shook with effort, but she managed to take a single, shaky step. Then another. She gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her legs were moving. She was walking, not perfectly, not strongly, but she was walking. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The sound of birds, the rustle of leaves, even the distant voices from the mansion all faded into silence. All Sophia could hear was the beating of her heart and the steady voice of Arun saying, "Yes. You are doing it. Do not stop now." She took a third step, then a fourth. Her balance wavered, and she nearly fell, but Arun steadied her. She laughed through her tears, joy spilling from her in a way she had never felt before. "I'm walking," she whispered, almost afraid the words would break the spell. "I'm really walking." Arun smiled, his eyes filled not with pride for himself but with happiness for her. "I told you," he said gently. "Sometimes the body remembers when the heart refuses to give up." Sophia collapsed back into her chair, exhausted but glowing. Her whole body ached, but she did not care. She had taken steps, something she had not done in years. She wanted to shout it to the world, to run into the mansion and tell her father everything. But once again, fear held her back. She wanted the moment to be perfect when he found out. She wanted him to see her walk with his own eyes. That perfect moment came sooner than she expected. Later that afternoon, her father finished his meetings and stepped into the garden for a breath of fresh air. He was not expecting to see Sophia there, standing beside her chair with Arun at her side. At first, he thought it must be some trick of the light. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and then froze as he watched his daughter take a trembling step forward. The world seemed to tilt for Jonathan Hale. For years he had poured his fortune into hospitals, medicines, and experts who gave him nothing but disappointment. And now, before his very eyes, his daughter was moving on her own. His mouth fell open, his hands shook, and tears blurred his vision. He rushed forward, but stopped short, afraid that if he touched her, the miracle would vanish. "Father," Sophia said, her voice trembling but strong, "look at me. I can walk." She took another step, and another, until she was standing directly in front of him. Jonathan fell to his knees, his arms outstretched, tears streaming down his face. He gathered her into his embrace, holding her as though he would never let go. "My child," he whispered over and over, "my precious child." Sophia wept too, not from sadness but from overwhelming joy. For the first time in years, she felt free not just in her body but in her heart. She pulled back slightly and looked into her father's eyes. It wasn't the doctors, "Father." It wasn't the money. It was him. She turned toward Arun, who stood quietly a few steps away, his head bowed humbly. Jonathan's gaze followed hers. He stared at the young farmer, taking in his plain clothes, his rough hands, his simple presence. At first, he struggled to believe that this man, with no certificates or titles, could have done what the greatest experts in the world could not. But then he looked back at his daughter, standing proudly on her own 2 feet, and all doubt vanished. He rose to his feet and walked over to Arun. For a moment, the powerful CEO and the humble farmer stood face to face, two men from completely different worlds. Jonathan's voice shook as he said, "I owe you more than I can ever repay. You have given my daughter her life back." Arun shook his head gently. "I did not give her life back. She carried life within her all along. I only helped her find it." Jonathan wanted to offer him wealth, gifts, anything his fortune could provide. But Arun raised his hand and refused. "Some things are not bought with money," he said simply. "What I did with faith, patience, and love. That is all." From that day forward, everything changed in the Hale household. Sophia continued to grow stronger with each passing week. She practiced walking every day, slowly building her balance and strength. Soon she could cross the garden without support, her laughter echoing through the air. Her father often sat and watched, tears shining in his eyes, never growing tired of the sight. News of her recovery eventually spread, but few knew the true story. To the world, it was a miracle. To Sophia, it was the result of trust, patience, and the kindness of a man who had nothing to his name but a heart full of belief. She never forgot the way Arun had looked at her, not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a person who could heal. That faith had changed her life forever. Years later, Sophia often thought back to the moment she first heard the words, "Let me try." It seemed so small then, almost impossible to believe. Yet those 3 words had opened the door to the greatest gift she could ever receive. She walked now with grace, not just on her legs but in her spirit. She walked knowing that miracles do not always come from riches or power. Sometimes, they come from the simplest hands, the quietest voices, and the humblest hearts. Her father, once a man who believed money could solve anything, learned the deepest lesson of his life. He learned that true wealth was not found in bank accounts or companies, but in faith, kindness, and love. And though he continued to lead his empire, his heart was forever changed by the farmer who had given him back his daughter's smile. As for Sophia, she never stopped walking through gardens, through halls, through life itself. Each step was a reminder of hope, of faith, and of the day she began to live again. And though the world saw only the miracle, she knew the truth. The miracle was not just that she walked again, but that she had learned to believe again.